It's a pleasure to actually look at two important phrases that we are hearing nowadays in our data journey. And one is data democratization, which is what we will be talking in this panel discussion. Later on, we will be tackling on another new term that is coming into the terminology, which is data modernization. But to begin, this session looks to dive deep into this term called data democratization. And maybe I'd like to set the scene just before I introduce the panelists, what data democratization actually means or defined. And so in this session, I would like to say that I'd like to pull a quote from Bernard Marr, who's the best-selling author for Big Data in Practice. In his view, data democratization means that everybody has access to data and there are no gatekeepers that create a bottleneck at the gateway to the data. The goal is to have anybody use data at any time to make decisions with no barriers to access or understanding. Now, we do know that in a practical context, that can be a utopian view of how data is being used in companies. But we'll get into that in our discussion. What we will have in terms of flow is we'll have a good discussion on the topic, looking at the challenges. We will have a short presentation in the middle to set the scene on what are the strategies and solutions that we can look at. And then we will look at culture, data-driven culture, what that really means to data democratization. And along the way, I'd like to invite you guys to actually use the Q&A function to send in your questions. We're happy to take any questions that you have. As mentioned, we have prizes for those who are quick on the trigger and come up with the first question, as well as those who have a really good question, which our speakers will choose who had the right question. Now, who are my comrades in this discussion? At first, we have Allan Song, Executive Director, Head FSS Ops, Strategy and Transformation at Standard Chartered Bank. We have Jacqueline Teo, who is the Chief Digital Officer, HGC Global Communications. We have Armstrong Mejilla, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Pre-Sales Director, APAC for Qlik. And for the presentation, we have Bill Zhang, who you'll see later, pre-sales. He's the pre-sales team lead for Greater China region at Qlik. So welcome guys to all the discussion. And let me start the discussion by, first of all, asking, when companies talk about data democratization, linking it to innovation and quick decision-making, it's that, in your picture, the main attraction coming from your experience. Maybe, Allan, you can talk about that first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you kind of take a step back and look at how this all started with the regulatory regime in the mid-2000s and data warehousing, things that sound pretty archaic at this point, and then now moving into insights from visualization or just access to the data that we haven't had before. Now, coming from the banking world, obviously our use cases expand even further than that. There are a lot of internal requirements. There's still a lot of regulatory requirements, but mostly where we want to focus now is how do we service our clients better? And that's really, that's a key reason why we want to make available our data, but the right information to help us respond faster, onboard faster, and provide products that our clients actually really want.
Does innovation come into the play?
Absolutely. I mean, innovation comes into play on one hand to be able to integrate our systems. I think we're going to talk about that. Our systems are all over the place. There are legacy platforms, vendor platforms that aren't standardized in terms of interfacing. There are a lot of new innovative tools out there that can help us achieve that stitching a lot faster, as well as the innovations now connecting us, communicating with our clients in a secure way, cross-border, cross-region, while still ensuring the data privacy that's required.
Great. Jacqueline, what about you? What does data democratization really means?
Look, in our context, it's really about putting data in the right place at the right time for the right use, right? And actually, it's going to sound rather cheesy, but it's actually giving data the voice in the organization that it needs, rather than working on your intuition or your 30 years of experience. It's actually trying to strike a balance of everything has a voice in the company, including data. So there has to be a balanced way in which we approach issues, problems, or challenges that a company would have, and try to resolve it using all means. And data is now becoming, or it is already, an indispensable part of that solution.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you're giving voice to data. I think that's an interesting line. But giving that voice to data, do people across the company hear the voice correctly? I think that's one of the issues. We will dig further, but I'm just wanting to build on that.
I think, Winston, people, it's human nature. People hear what they want to hear always, and it's not just with data. And it's one of those disciplines where you do want data to tell the story, but it is often embellished by then everything else that happens around the data. And so that is not something you can help. What you can do as part of the leadership in data in your organization is to actually drive the depth and width in which data is then applied to the business problem. And I think that's a different perspective. I think people will think and use data or stretch the truth of data depending on what outcomes they're actually trying to do. And you see that all the time. You have data scientists that will have a set of hypotheses or scenarios that are totally skewed based on what they believe an outcome could be and should be. And that's influenced by many things. So I think the most important thing is that people are actively thinking about data. I think the finesse, there is no wrong or right, I don't think, in how you use it and when you use it. I think the most important thing is that when you use it, the outputs of what it was intended for is the right output. And you will very, very quickly know, because your customer is going to tell you so, or what you applied as a solution isn't working after a period of time. You'll know it very quickly. So you can skew how you want to hear that voice. The voice will tell you very quickly whether or not you heard it correctly.
Okay, and just digging that, and I would like to bring in Allan and Armstrong slightly later on this question. You mentioned that as people, sometimes people tend to skew. But in this environment, especially when it comes to a COVID-19 pandemic environment, and when you have market triggers, there's a lot more market triggers, and you can't use historic data to sort of navigate your way through. Did data democratization, that concept, become much more urgent within companies?
I think so. I absolutely think so, Winston. I think people are looking for ways in which they can, within their risk appetite, predict certain outcomes of the actions. I'm not going to say predict the actual data or models, right? It's not really about that. They're trying to apply an action, and what they're trying to do is predict whether or not the action, in truth, I think, measures the risk appetite and the expectations of the company. I think a lot of people that use data are often mistaken. They say, oh, we're going to try and predict propensity to do something. You're going to predict, our share of wallet and this. And those are all good ways of predicting. But what you're actually trying to do is you're saying, in something like a pandemic, your company will have a certain expectation of where the market is or where they will actually end up in the market. Right, the company has a certain prediction, has a certain expectation of the risk appetite it can actually allow in each market. So you're trying to predict whether or not the action you take today will result in the alignment to those KPIs tomorrow. And I think that's something quite subtle that people miss when they're trying to do this in this day and age. They're trying to predict an unpredictable market.
Allan, what about yours?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last year has shown that we had to throw out a lot of our models because they didn't apply anymore. And a lot of those models were based on just a static understanding of seasonality, market trends. Good example is our corporate actions teams worldwide. All of a sudden, annual general meetings, proxy events, those things were happening at very different times throughout the year. Whereas previously we had a static model that said you have to build this capacity in this team every March or every May. So what we're finding is that in order to be more predictive and dynamic and have a real-time view, we need to connect those data sources, those market sources, to the people that are making those decisions. And that currently didn't exist, right? The people making the hiring decisions don't necessarily have access to understanding when these market trends are happening. So that's forced us to build that link. And I think that's one piece of the puzzle that we're going to talk about when it comes to democratizing data end to end.
Okay. Arms, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, thanks, Winston. I think the topics that were discussed by Allan and Jacqueline resonate very well with us in Qlik. So if people are wondering, my role in the company is actually I run a team of solution architects across Asia Pacific. So that basically means we need to go into hundreds of our customers and understands business pain points first before we can provide any solution. And obviously that revolves pretty much around data analytics and modernization, democratization, and all that stuff, right? So those things that they mentioned earlier are very rampant, in every single company that we talk to, really, right? It's not only maybe the retail sector, the FSI sector, and the telcos and all that. So you would be surprised that, when we did a study about what are the reasons people and organizations actually go through a data-driven transformation within their company, the top disciplines, I would say, or activities just really revolve around um, uh, opening business revenue streams, new ones that they haven't thought of before, or maybe cost cutting. That's very very transparent in the last couple of years, I guess. And maybe the other one would be optimizing business processes, right? So all of those have data at the core of everything. So all of those things that we're trying to do in the organization, it revolves around what we do with data.
Okay, that's great. Is there any new reasons why people are looking at data democratization or end-to-end platform with your work? With
Yeah,
your
I won't necessarily say they're new, right? I would say there have been more urgency to do that now in the last couple of years, even just before the pandemic or now that we are here, right? So back then, the promise of business intelligence and analytics is to help business decisions. That's always been the promise of business intelligence from 20, 30 years ago, right? Obviously, some organizations are much more mature than the others. And, if you talk to IDC or Gartner, there are kind of varying degrees of success in doing that for a specific organization. But um, right now, when the pandemic hit and people, if you can't go to the shops, if you can't go to the office to do your work, things has to work, right? Things have to be, easy in terms of analyzing your sales trends, analyzing your finances, and all that. So that means there's a lot more pressure. There has been a lot more pressure to organizations to make sure data is available, because you have to continue that promise of BI.
Okay, that's great. At this moment, I'd like to call out a poll, since we have all heard from you panelists on what are your motivations and how do you see data democratization. But let's hear from the audience what motivates them on data democratization. Can we start with poll one? So it is, what is your prime motivation for data democratization? And just choose one of the solutions. I know there's a few that people like to choose, but just choose the one that you feel is the top motivator. We give them around 2 to 3 minutes. Allan, while we are waiting for the results, I'd like to hear from you. You talk about end-to-end data platform. The problem with an end-to-end data platform is a company needs to be ready to let go of their data silos and the politics that usually surrounds all these silos. In your opinion, how difficult is that, and who then drives data democratization?
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult. I'll say I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't difficult. So I'm kind of glad the problem is there. You know, I view it across a few streams. Like one is getting the investment, right? Getting the leaders to buy in, and a lot of that has to do with aligning that top-down data strategy with the actual strategy and use cases coming from each of the silos. I think that's very important and sometimes very overlooked. Because if you are a data professional, often you think that this is an obvious thing. This is an obvious use case. Everyone should buy in, but that's not the case. So you have to kind of align the strategies. Also, you have to align the technical architecture. So every silo in most firms have their own platforms, have their own architecture, ensuring that that is aligned with what you're trying to deliver from an end-to-end solution is quite important. So if you get those two things, you are much more likely to get that investment, to determine who's the right owners, and also to build in those flexibilities from your long-term target model to ensure that you're also capable of dynamically addressing changes in the market and changes within your internal processes.
Yeah. Did you have to rethink your entire data platform as a result?
Yeah, I mean, we're still rethinking our data platform, and it's always, I think one view everyone has to take is always going to be a work in progress. You're never going to have that ideal utopian state. If you think that you're going to have that, you're probably wrong. So it's always about working in progress, always having that owner, not just delivering something and leaving, but perpetually looking at new opportunities, continuing to enhance that platform.
Okay. Jacqueline, your thoughts on breaking down data silos and making people share their data, which is always very difficult.
It is difficult. Look, I think we have less problems, and I hope it's true for most people. We have less problems in terms of our structured data. So data that is created from transactions and application use and functions, right? We have a lot less problems because that's somewhere. We have different problems in regards to it, which is more about around its cleanliness, profiling, normalization, right? But where I think most struggle, and we certainly struggle, is that through the years, people have created multiple things on spreadsheets, access database, they run their own SQL queries on their machines and things like that, right? And there's a lot of logic and intelligence in it on which they believe they are doing business intelligence every day. Right, so they say, I'm going to create, an acquisition call list, for example. I think I'm going to do an analysis of sales numbers, and they run it off their machine. Now, getting those things out of things that are sitting on people's individual machines, that's what I think that's what we're struggling with, right? And the best that we can do is say, look, we've created the tool set for you, we've created the platform. We don't really want your data, because it's of no use to anyone except that particular department or person that has to generate the data set. So we actually don't have a real, forceful need in our company. We do it more, funny enough, democratically, and say, you have a space on the platform to put this. And if you put it there, it'd be a lot more effective for you. The second challenge to those silos is that even if someone was willing, and a lot of people are, because they can see that it saves them a lot of manual work, and it also enables them to do a whole lot more. So there will always be a group of people that say, great, I'm going to do it. And there will always be a group of people that says, no, I like it running on my laptop, no matter what you do. At some point in time, that steam runs out, because you get to an Excel version which cannot sustain these some of the older things. But the second thing is that a lot of these home-built logic actually doesn't translate well to the way you need the data platform to run. And actually, a lot of these models need to be blown away, and the business application of the data sets needs to be rethought. And that's the hard bit. That's what we're finding hard when you talk about silos. I think the fact that silos exist is not terrible. is never a terrible issue. They will exist. The only question you have is, can I build a platform, or can I have a platform that enables that siloed data to be consumed when and as it's needed? The fact that it's actually siloed, I'm going to say from our perspective, it's not the same for everybody, actually doesn't matter as much to us.
Sure, thanks. And Arms, could you add on to that? Because as you face clients, when they talk about end-to-end platforms, you have to struggle with the silos and convince people to share the data, because that's your success factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the comment that Alan made in terms of it's always a work in progress, right? The industry term nowadays in terms of integrating data silos in any organization is continuous intelligence, right? So that's currently what I've been hearing in the market nowadays, right? It's relatively new. But what it basically means is that you don't have to, subscribe to the idea of 10, 15 years ago that a data integration project, for example, takes 2 to 3 years. Like it's a large transformation project that shows ROI only after 2.5 years. It was true before. I was there, right? I built a couple of data warehouses in banks when I was younger. It does give you ROI only after a while, right? And maybe it gets canned after that, right? So nowadays it's not necessarily true, because there's a lot of agile ways of doing data transformation or data integration, right? With these concepts of data ops, if people have heard about that, or continuous intelligence, active intelligence, something that you will probably hear from Bill later on, right? So the idea behind siloed, kind of data teams, to Jacqueline's point, is that it's not necessarily bad, and it's just a state of the business now, right? What's important is that we have to kind of be agile in tackling this, right? We have our own chief data officer in Qlik, Joe DeSantos, right? He wrote this ebook a couple of months ago about data fitness, like a 30, 60, 90-day plan for getting your organization data fit. I would advise everyone, including the panelists and the audience, to look at that ebook. There's a blog as well. It talks about attacking the data problems bit by bit, right? Just like doing your fitness bit by bit. You do shoulders first, you do your legs first, and all that stuff. That's kind of similar to that approach.
Okay, that's interesting. And while the data might be fit, I'm struggling to get physically fit in this pandemic lockdown situation. Could you bring up the results of the first poll? It'll be interesting to see. So the majority has said improved operational efficiency. I think it echoes Jacqueline's point. I mean, once they see data being available, they see the efficiency that can happen, and they can do a lot more. I think that, and also it goes to the second point on faster decision making. It's interesting so it's aligned with what we have. I would like to now invite Bill. Bill will have a short presentation now on active intelligence. This is what Arms was actually talking about, and he'll expand on that concept a bit before we go back to the discussion on that. And we are already seeing questions coming on Q&A, so I'll be also attending to those questions. But for now, Bill, the virtual floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. So thanks everyone for joining this session. And I'm Bill. I'm the GCR pre-sales lead now. So following the panel discussion previously, now I would share a little bit understanding of the current data challenges during digital transformation and how Qlik address it. So Qlik company is founded in Lund, Sweden. Now we're headquartered in King Prussia, PA, USA. So we now support over 50,000 customers, and we work with over 1,700 partners across more than 100 countries. So we have over 2,000 employees. Qlik gets very high appraisal from the market. We are recognized as industry leader by Gartner for past 11 continuous years. So from the business, Qlik keeps a stable growth in recent years. And most of our business are developed and delivered together with our partner ecosystem. So including some global SIs, cloud vendors, and local partners as well. And across almost every sectors, every industries, Qlik is helping those industry leaders who are doing more with data in ways they didn't imagine possible. Before going further, let's talk about a little bit the data challenges, right? So the life of an organization is made of business moments, these moments that require an action, a shift in direction in order to mitigate risks, stay ahead, and make some positive impacts on your business. The problem is those moments can easily be missed and translate into some real tangible problems for your business. So let's make some examples. What if you are a B2B technology provider and you miss warning signs of dissatisfaction of an important customer because your systems are not capturing those data from social media? And what if you are a bank and a sudden a large withdrawal from a key customer doesn't trigger any alerts in your system? And what if you are a manufacturer and your systems fail to record anomalies in purchasing trends from a large retail account, leading to serious supply issues? And what if you are a construction company, but you're not unable to track whether a supervisor is with a crew to ensure the safety? And to seize these business moments, organizations need to arm their people and the systems with some up-to-date real-time data, real-time information, and analysis, and the triggering of actions. So how does Qlik help address the challenges? With some traditional BI, it cannot stand up to those demands. It takes a perceived approach through the use of pre-configured curated data sets. It lacks a governed data-to-end data pipeline, leveraging automation to produce business-ready data, and is designed to inform action, not compel action. And the demands of digital economy are driving needed change in approach to modern BI in order to seize these important business moments, what we call active intelligence. So active intelligence from Qlik is based on some continuous intelligence from real-time, up-to-date information. And it helps establish an intelligent analytics data pipeline, which I would introduce a little more detail in the following slides, with dynamic business content and logic. So it's designed to trigger immediate actions. And that's where and how we apply an end-to-end solution spanning those three key component parts. Around our data integration platform, our data analytics platform, and that unique approach to customer success, data literacy as a service. So why is Qlik unique in all three of these areas? So based on what we can offer, those three key components we mentioned before, we could help organizations to close those gaps and manage the data pipeline end to end. So what we're calling an analytics data pipeline, transforming raw data into informed action and enabling active intelligence. So I'm going to use the next few slides to break this down and explain what happens in an active intelligence state. The first state in this analytics data pipeline is about freeing data from the silos. So we take the raw data, internal, external, or derivable data like competitive data in the market from actually wherever it is in the cloud, multi-cloud, on-premise, and we continuously deliver it where it needs to be, right, reflecting changes in real time. So as you can see from this slide, the notion of real time is the key. So once we free the data, we want to make sure that users can easily find it. So at this stage, we can capture the data, preserving its lineage, and we perform some smart identification in a governed catalog, where users can shop for the data and publish to the analytics tool. Of course, Qlik would be the first option. So at that point, the data is analytics ready. Now we are at a stage in our analytics data pipeline where users can begin to understand the data. And so, of course, in Qlik users can take advantage of the power of augmented analytics to uncover richer insights. They can collaborate with other users. They can do that on the go. So collaboration is important because it's about breaking down the silos between the different types of data personas in an organization. So at that point, the data is business ready, meaning that is business logic applied on the data. So the final step, once you understand the data, is being able to take action. And that's a key component in active intelligence. So here is the idea that the system embeds analytics into automated workflows and delivers some sophisticated context-aware alerts in real time. So changes happen, right? So the data is actionable now. So when you implement an intelligent analytics data pipeline, where the information flows continuously into every processes, you optimize every business moment through informed action and accelerate your business value. That's active intelligence. That Bob you see at the center shows those core components we just mentioned that make up active intelligence from us, from Qlik. And so we do that because we deliver an end-to-end platform. There are a lot of key components, key elements to this approach. So all of which will echo the analytics data pipeline as I introduced before. Ultimately, this platform is open to any analytics use case, wherever the data resides or wherever the compute needs to reside. Qlik will work and engage in any cloud platform supporting those big three, right? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, equally any cloud that you want to deploy in. And our data integration platform supports the notion of CDC, what we call change data capture and real-time streaming of data into your targeted locations, your DB, your DW, or your data lakes. It enables us to automate the process of managing and curating data warehouses and ultimately drive the notion of data lake creation, supporting the migration of data into cloud environment as we generate, deliver, refine, and merge data from all sources into the targets. And of course, we believe that Qlik delivers a best analytics experience. It just supports a range of end-to-end consumption measures around self-service analytics, embedded analytics, guided analytics, mobile solution, conversational analytics, reporting, alerting, all those different kinds of use cases we can support. And our catalog capability sits between these two portfolios. It bridges the worlds between IT and the business. So connecting the data from our data integration capabilities and feeding it into an analytics environment. It's not just a Qlik analytics solution. It can also be some other BI vendor in this market. So this open end-to-end platform supports and enables that read, find it, understand it, and action it value chain. The ultimately is basis for why customers consistently choose Qlik as the strategic partner over other providers and tools. Okay then, so thanks all. That's pretty much I want to share. And the last slide is about our upcoming Qlik World Online event. In this event, you would expect more exciting innovations from us, from Qlik. Okay, so thank you, and back to you, Winston.
Thank you, Bill. And for those who want to know more about Qlik World, please can contact us or any of the Qlik people, and they'll be happy to share the link with you or more information. Just wanted to come to you, Arms. You mentioned continuous intelligence. Bill mentioned active intelligence. For the audience, could you make the distinction?
Yeah. Well, so the active intelligence kind of concept is loosely derived from continuous intelligence, right? When as part of our internal research with our chief product officer, our data officer, it kind of talks about very similar things, but obviously active intelligence kind of discusses more about our products, right? It's more of that technology-driven conversation. But I think the bottom line is that the business outcome is the more important one, right? Being able to catch changes from the source, from legacy systems early, bringing them out to the people who need it the most, and then triggering actions that, because that's part of the promise, right? Yes, you have the data, what you gonna do with it, right? There has to be actionable data that results from that exercise.
Okay, that's great. Jacqueline, I'd like to go to you. People talk about real-time intelligence when people think it's almost instantaneous. It's not really the same thing, because real-time means different from a stakeholder to a person who is actually operations. So a lot of it, the reason why I wanted to ask you is more towards the line of IoT. People are using IoT to using those data streams to actually make real-time decision making. Are we ready?
I think in some case it's let me maybe plan these thoughts, right? I think where things are, I'm not going to say real time, but it's really in near real time that a decision would need to be made. And I challenge and say there are actually very few customer events that really have that unpredictability that need such near real time enactment of decisions. Most of it is actually pre-thought, pre-planned, pre-built into the customer experience. That's what you do, and that's what digital does, and that's what customer experience and UI people do. They've pre-built it. So there are certain functions on your online, there's certain functions in your e-commerce. Those functions are triggered by other things and get served up data, right? That's pre-built, right? The fact that you might acquire a data set that was created 2 seconds ago is yet another whole story in this context. I would say in terms of near real time, where you get use cases that are more machine driven, which is applications that are empowered to actually create decision sets for themselves to enact an action, is where you would probably find more real-time decisions. So as an example, if you think about IoT, and we do a lot of IoT for our customers, mainly in property management services, retail services, and things like that, right? There has to be a very quick decision made in a building if the temperature gauge is beyond a certain thing, right? And that may change depending on several different factors, some of which are static factors, some of which are quite dynamic factors, depending on what it is. But those things are done by machines, triggered by machines, and that feature set and the event is actually created by a machine. It's actually created by a machine. So I dare say a lot of what people are thinking of near real time in terms of the context that they're using it, I would challenge and say they're not actually real time. I think what we're actually talking about is two things, right? One is that data is actually created and may be consumed in real time. That is true at the source. The second part is that the consumption of the model may be required in real time, but that model was pre-built. You don't miraculously create models out of thin air and go, it's a real-time model, right? The serving of that model and then the consumption of the outputs of that, or the use of that model may be required in near real time. And I think, I hate to be pedantic about this, but I think it helps people think about what they're actually trying to build on their end-to-end platforms if they could challenge the thing that way.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And before I go to Allan, please do come in the questions. We will be actually fielding a lot of this right after this few questions that I have. First, Allan, your industry lives on data. I mean, has been living on data for a very long time. It's basically that and trust are your basic currencies in the banking industry. But nowadays, like you mentioned earlier on in our discussion before this, it was ESG. Let's say we're talking about ESG. It is so data poor in the sense that is not whether there's data sources out there, we do not know, but people are not sharing as willingly. So in that kind of context, to what extent can an industry push data democratization? And I'm trying to also link to what the regulators are doing in terms of open banking.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ESG is such a good example of the new hot topic on the street. And it's a good example of where we aren't really mature both internally in our firms and on the market in terms of solutions on how to get that data. Now, this is where data advocacy plays a big role. And working with our clients, co-creating on our data initiatives, working together to develop our interfacing and our capabilities is very important. And in our example as well, advocacy with local governments, local depositories. As good as you are in your data journey, you're going to hit that roadblock, whether it's a regulator, whether it's a depository, whether it's a client. So you have to keep that window open and work on co-creating. Now, a prerequisite of that is understanding your own data as best as possible, of course. So you still need to continue to focus on your internal journey, still continue driving operational efficiencies, still continue managing your risk using your data, but then working in parallel with those people, with those market players, to kind of continue to innovate.
Okay, Arms, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've seen some of our customers, I think particularly on when you mentioned about open banking, we've seen a lot of our customers in Asia Pacific respond to that in terms of finding ways to unlock their data, let's say core banking systems that are locked behind legacy systems, or some other data that's locked behind mainframes, right? So we've seen a lot of customers trying to unlock and maybe put that in modernized warehouses, modern data lakes, or even to the cloud, right? You'll be surprised how many kind of government agencies or even banking institutions that are now opening up to the concept of bringing non-sensitive data to the cloud, right? So we've seen that, and in terms of real time, to Jacqueline's point earlier, there are two things, right? You can feed the data real time, that's a lot of technologies that go together and be able to say, there's a withdrawal, right? Or someone swiped their credit card, and then it goes right after that action happens, it goes to a dashboard, for example, after a couple of seconds, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean the user will look at it. in that real time. I think that was an important point there. So to us, right, when we talk to our customers and to the people we work with, real time is as real as what that user needs, right? In terms of, I need that data now, so that should be available now, whenever now is.
Okay, interesting point. And Allan and Arms, I actually wanted to expand on what you just mentioned. A lot of times we assume that the end user is a human. Nowadays, that's not true. You have machines or AI algorithms who are the end users. How do you actually allow data democratization when you might have data bias, which might perpetuate when machines actually use it and create a lot more different decisions? Maybe Arms, you can go first on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, we haven't seen a lot of, I'd say, customers doing that from our experience so far. There are some, right? There are some, but I think it's a very important topic about data bias, because it's not only machines, right? When people look at data, they will always have preconceived notions about what it should be. I think that was mentioned by Jacqueline earlier too. But I think having a mature kind of data literacy culture within the company helps in this regard, right? Because people who know finance, right, people who know marketing, right, they should be working with those kind of data, right? And I think that there's a lot of talk nowadays, and I won't get into the details of that, of having a data driven culture, and data literacy is at the forefront of that. I think one of the common myths that that organizations, including ourselves, fall into is that we have to turn everybody into data scientists, right? Everybody in staff, they have to be data scientists. They have to know how to code. They have to know how to interpret linear regressions. That's a myth, right? We've never seen real organizations who are mature in thinking do that, right? And don't overeducate. I think that's important too. When you overeducate, your staff, and this is something coming out of an interview we did with a chief data officer, you have to kind of streamline. It's similar to any education. You have to streamline people and departments to say, okay, these guys are known for this, these guys are familiar with this, and use them for that purpose.
Okay. Allan, could you expand from your experience?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, educating just the right amount is critical. And the point about AI applications, robotics on top of the data, that's a big reason why a lot of our silos aren't as open to releasing their data and being a part of that end-to-end data strategy. So that comes down to really making everyone aware exactly where their data is going, what are the downstream outputs and consumers. They don't need to know all the details. I think to Arms's point, they don't need to know every specific detail, but they need to know who's consuming and how it's being consumed.
Okay.
One of the challenges is actually evaluations as well. Is it's great to have static transactional data, and that's never going to change. But where are the valuations happening in that chain? That will allow silos to better understand and feel comfortable around releasing their data and knowing how it's going to be used.
Thank you. And I'd like to switch gears and move to data governance. And we have a question here. And again, I'd like to invite everyone, if you have other questions, please do ask. We have experts here who are willing to share knowledge and share their information. So Allan, that's a question actually directed at you, but I'd like to expand it later on to everyone on the panel. Legacy data. Everybody sits on legacy data. So when we talk about data democratization, we are assuming there are data connectors to a data platform, but most legacy systems are not built for that. So how do you manage this from your perspective? How do you actually tackle the problem? And then I'll go to Jacqueline on that.
Well, I mean, that's probably our biggest problem, right? I mean, we have some systems that are 30 years old, systems that aren't being supported anymore. It's even worse when they're a vendor platform, being able to build those interfaces. Now, actually going back to the open API question, I mean, a lot of work has happened in the marketplace, but actually using OPI, using open banking, using APIs internally to enable that connectivity between legacy platforms and middleware and warehouses is how we're addressing it. So we're trying to get that data out into a data lake or even into another warehouse so that we can start stitching it all together. It's a bit of a challenge because the other factor is also looking at when you're going to decommission this platform. So a lot of people have old legacy platforms on their decommissioning plan and you don't want to spend any more money on it. That just goes back to the importance of getting the data, understanding where it's going to be used. That's where you can get the buy-in for a tactical approach, at least, to build those interfaces.
Okay. And Jacqueline, your thoughts on data governance?
Look, data governance is tricky, and I think where I can see definitely for us as a point of practicality, right? We're actually moving away from concepts such as data stewardship, data ownership, data accountability. I think as you democratize data, the concept that you now have data that logically belongs. It logically belongs to different domains, right? And you're actually trying to create a framework of access identity at a domain level, not necessarily at a user or function level. And that is really quite a different way of thinking about your platforms. So then we actually become the domains that we have actually are agnostic to actually data ownership. So it just becomes, is this piece of data required for this purpose? Right. And it's a different way, it's a different question for us. We found that if we had to, follow a lot of the current frameworks of governance, it would cause, I think it was both Allan and that said, you educate just enough, but we found that if we actually had to follow, the current frameworks that are available on data governance, we would actually have to educate a lot. User groups a lot, and that was not going to be as effective for us, and it was still going to be prone to subjective human opinion, really. So we found different way of doing data governance. And the second part, I think you mentioned, was about then legacy data. And we have, I'm pretty sure Allan and I have very similar challenges here. And there's a lot of it you can't actually modernize. So we do all the right things. We modernize our database, we modernize our applications. We go through a strategy of data replication, depending on whether revisions of data need to be created in near real time in the distributed systems. We look at how we fragment and reorganize our data, right? So we look at a hybrid of things to actually do this. And that architecture is actually quite complex, but it does form part of the end-to-end data platform. And I would suggest to anybody looking at legacy data, there is more than one hammer you take to that nail, unfortunately, and you're going to have to be striking different hammers at different times throughout this work in progress. It's a bit unfortunate. So unless you have the luxury of blowing away systems, starting anew, it doesn't matter. It answers the issue to a certain point in time. Legacy data fundamentally remains legacy data. It's data that was created a long time ago that is not useful in its current form, right? And you really have to decide how and if you want to use it, and that's quite a different approach to it.
Thank you. And I'd like to maybe wrap up the session. Maybe I'll ask Arms for his insights on data governance as well as working with legacy data, and then we can just wrap up the session as it is. Arms, your final thoughts on legacy data and data governance?
Yeah, sure. I think data governance, obviously, it's a big topic, right? But the things that we have learned over the years, and we recently did a survey across hundreds of chief data officers and CIOs in our customer patch, is that one of the most common mistakes kind of organizations do is to lead with picking a technology, right? And then you buy a technology just for the features and the sleek security features of data governance and then the capability to do segregation of data stewards, just like Jacqueline mentioned, and all that stuff. So it's obviously a wrong kind of approach to start with. Where organizations succeed is start with a framework and a set of processes, right? And then you pick a technology that will enable that, right? That is, that's what we hear. That is, far more important in kind of tackling the data governance journey, I'd say. And in terms of legacy systems, I think we've talked about this a lot, right? We've seen a lot of these customers try to move it to a state, I think to Allan's point, to a state where people can actually analyze it, because the reason it's called legacy is that people cannot get to it that easy, right? So, bring it to a state where it's available is the importance of where the market is going.
Thank you. And Bill, I just wanted to ask, do you have any final 1 or 2 points that you want the audience to take away for this discussion?
No, all is good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And thanks everyone for joining this. I know we have some questions online, and I'll be asking for the next session, which is on data modernization, where we will be digging deeper with some data scientists.